This is my second time recording this review because the original animus of this review was I was originally just going to record a review of the M50X because this is a pretty polarizing headphone, one that I've had for a while and one that a lot of people have heard. So I feel like it would be a good reference point for a lot of people going forward making these reviews. But then I won a $100 gift card through my workplace. Shout out to my boss. And I used that money to buy the Fiio FT1s because they've been staring at me on the shelf for Lord knows how long. Everyone's had nothing but good things to say about these online, and I really wanted to try it. And when I was first filming this, I forgot that I had turned my Spotify down to 50% when I was playing games with my friends so I could listen to music and game at the same time. And then I forgot to turn it back up. And apparently, there's a very technical explanation for why this happened, but it changed the sound of the Fiio FT1s. And that had some negative consequences for the Fiio FT1s. And I filmed an entire half of this video with the wrong idea of how they sound. Now, the M50X, they were largely unaffected by that change. But yeah, basically I had to re-record a lot of this, and this was going to be originally kind of like a hot take. But it ended up being closer than I was expecting. So if you wanna see how close it was and why it was so close and what I mean by all this, let's get into the video. I'm probably not gonna put a transition in there. All right, so my first impression of the Fiio FT1 is that they are big. They are very big. I mean, you can see that compared to my hand, they're huge. And if I hold them up next to the M50X, which are a more standard pair of headphones, you can see that the cup size is huge on these bad boys. And they're also pretty heavy. Like you can see the wood grain on that. It's real wood. And it's a pretty solid build quality overall, it would seem. But due to the overall size and weight of them, when you put them on your head, they do tend to weigh down on your head. I think these could really benefit from a strap because there's not a ton of padding on the headband, and it does tend to press down on your head. I think there are companies out there that do make straps that you can add to headphones, such as these. But yeah, that's definitely going to be kind of a negative there. Another thing about them, which I actually kind of like, is how deep the cups are. So the cups are very deep and they're very cushy, so they're pretty comfortable in that way. But you can also see that they are pretty freaking huge and they do look kind of bulbous. So if you're a streamer and you want headphones that aren't going to look kind of weird, maybe these aren't the ones for you. Another nice thing about them is they have removable cables, which is always a nice feature and which not every pair of headphones or every headphone company does. Looking at you, Grado. But they come with both a balanced and unbalanced cable. Now, the unbalanced is the same headphone jack that you would expect to find in just about any headphones. They also do come with a little 1/4-inch adapter, which if you try a lot of headphones, you'll probably end up with an entire drawer full of these. But the nice thing about this cable is that it's just long enough to where I can lean back in my chair and I don't need any extensions, which is something that I appreciate a lot. Okay, now let's talk about the M50X. Now you might notice that these don't look like your typical stock M50X. I've replaced the pads on them as well as put this head strap on there for two particular reasons. Number one, the fake leather on them does tend to crumble. Now look, I had these things for years Mine didn't crumble until like a few years in, but there are some people where it crumbles a lot faster. Basically, it starts to flake off. But another reason why I replaced the pads, which is one of the biggest downsides of these headphones, the pads suck. The default pads are very thin and very squishy. That combined with a pretty strong clamp force means it's gonna push the headphones right up against your head and really squish your ears. The originals I had were the stock pads. I couldn't wear them for that long simply because they were just so uncomfortable. I think that is the biggest drawback of these, especially for recording artists that are going to be wearing them for a long time. They're going to be pretty uncomfortable. I do recommend swapping the pads even before they start to crumble. Now, these ones are the Brainwaves pads, which they purport to keep roughly the same sound characteristics and overall tonality of the originals, but they're a lot more comfortable. On top of that, the top pad basically has like not much padding at all. It has not much padding, and so it tends to press down on your head. And I in particular have like sort of a bump right in the middle of my head, and it tends to press down on that. So once again, not very comfortable with these ones. On the brighter side though, they have a pretty good build quality. Like I said, I've had these ones for, I would have got them in around like 2015, so that's almost 10 years I've had these things, and they still work pretty damn well. I will say though, the crumbling pads are a big issue. While the pads are pretty easily replaceable, you just kind of slide them out like that. The headband is not easily replaceable. You can't just, now I have this headband on top of it, but the stock headband, you can't just take it off like you can with like the Beyerdynamic DT770s. Those ones have like a little snap-on thing. This does not have that. You would basically have to take these whole things apart if you want to replace the headband. So that in my mind is kind of a bummer and definitely a downgrade. Now, another nice thing about them is that they have 180-degree swivel, which is really nice because you can lay them flat, you can point them upwards, you can do whatever you need to do. They can angle to fit a lot of different head sizes, and that is something that the Fiio FT1s do not have. They have pretty limited mobility when it comes to that. Now, it does have a removable cable, but it uses this proprietary locking mechanism, which is annoying because this is just a regular 2.5mm headphone plug, which is different from the normal headphone plug. It's a little smaller, but it's still pretty common. However, since it uses a proprietary locking mechanism, you either need to get a cable from Techinca or you need an aftermarket cable that's designed for it. Another thing about the cable, it is pretty short. Like that's only about 4 feet, and that I can't plug into my source and lean back in my chair with. However, they do come with other cables. I don't remember exactly which ones they come with because it has been like 8 years since I originally bought these. But I know that they do come with a coiled cable as well as one of these 1/4-inch adapters. So if you're doing some studio stuff at like a table, or if you're like me and you just like to lean back in your chair, there are options for that, which is very nice. Another nice thing about them is that they fold up, which is nice for not only storage, but to be able to transport these. So whether you're someone who is just packing these in your bag to go to college with, or you work in like a studio and space is at a premium, then these ones are a pretty solid option. And these hinges are pretty robust. These are not likely to break, but I mean, anything made of plastic that you're going to use a lot, there is still a chance. Now, the Fiio FT1, like I said, these are huge. The pads do not lay flat. They do not fold up. They do give you a carrying case. However, the carrying case is pretty freaking huge. But at least they give you one, which is very nice. So, in terms of sound, they have very different visions for what they want to sound like, and that's because these two are for different purposes. To start off with the Fiio FT1, this is definitely meant for more of a casual music listening headphone, something that you can just sit and relax at home and listen to, and it definitely looks like it. This looks like something you'd sort of throw on like a study in an easy chair and sit and listen, and the sound does reflect that. It is a very smooth, very organic, very vibey sound. Fairly inoffensive. It's not really going to ruffle anyone's feathers or have any sharp peaks or anything like that. It is really meant to give a, smooth, organic, overall enjoyable experience. And now you look at the Audio-Technica M50x. This is a tool, or it's meant at least to be a tool for musical creation. It is much more articulate, it is more resolving, and that's there for a reason. It is meant for tracking vocals. It is meant for being able to hear different cues. So like if a drummer is trying to keep a beat, or if you're trying to hear things that are strange in your recording equipment or anything like that, it is really meant for critical listening. And to that end, it does have very good instrument separation. There is a reason for that. Obviously, the purpose is for you to be able to pick out the different elements of a recording, but how they do that is a very interesting conversation. We will get into that. But first, what I want to talk about when comparing these two, the first area I think it makes sense to compare is the mid-range, because they are fairly similar in terms of mid-range performance and presentation. They are fairly standard, fairly straightforward. It's not exactly much to really comment on there, other than they both do it fairly competently. I will say the M50X does have sort of more of a pop-in effect overall, where things will sort of like jump out at you, where, one word might sound a little quiet, the other one might sound a little louder and more in your face. And funny enough, the FT1 almost has like the opposite problem, where everything sounds smooth and all put together overall. But then sometimes you might lose track of things in the mix. And there's a reason for that, and we will get into that. In fact, let's kind of get into it right now, because it does lead to a good conversation about what really separates these two, and that is mainly how they present bass and treble, because that contributes a lot to the overall mix of the headphones. So starting off with the treble, in terms of the Fiio FT1's treble, it is a little underemphasized in the mid treble, and mid treble is oftentimes where you get a lot of, for lack of a better word, detail. Detail covers a lot of different things, but oftentimes a lot of the edges of words, edges of sounds, that is typically where that sort of information lives. Compare that to the M50X, which has a more emphasized mid-treble. So really the effect of that is that the Fiio FT1 can sometimes sound a bit indistinct. There are a lot of times where it sounds fairly clear, especially when the recording that you're listening to isn't super busy. Like if it's a lone vocalist and maybe like a guitar in the background, then it usually sounds pretty damn good. It's when the track is more busy that it starts to fall apart. And especially in comparison to the M50X, which sounds very articulate and has a lot of that separation,
which is due to, in large part, to that treble emphasis. So that treble emphasis, it really gives it more resolution, and it can make things come more into view and really help you pick out the different elements, and almost gives your brain like almost a light bulb effect. Upping the mid treble does kind of come off as sort of an artificial way of increasing detail. It's kind of like turning up the sharpening slider when you're editing a picture. Yes, it looks clearer, the lines look cleaner, but it can kind of look a little inorganic and a little sharp, too sharp. So that's sort of a downfall of these, is that it can sound a bit peaky in the treble, and that almost creates sort of a crackling, like a crackly treble. It's just a bit. For the most part, it comes off pretty clear, but it is more noticeable on tracks that emphasize sort of the higher end. So like female vocals, you might notice it a little bit. Most people probably won't notice it because they don't really have a good frame of reference to compare to, and maybe they're not even looking for that. But obviously, when you're putting two different pairs of headphones on your head, the differences will become more apparent. Now, when comparing the two and switching between them, the Fiio FT1 is very enjoyable and it does sound very smooth, but then when I put the M50x back on, it's sort of like a light bulb is going off in your head, and it becomes much more exciting, and it becomes a bit of a clearer picture. Like, you can get a clearer idea of what's going on and maybe what the sort of intent of the music was. Now, in terms of the bass, they both have pretty good bass presentations. I actually really enjoy the bass on both of these. A lot of people tend to meme and joke. Well, by a lot of people, I mean particularly audiophiles and people who are a bit picky tend to complain about the bass on the M50X and how boomy it is, and how how it bleeds into the mids and all that, which really, it's like, I did not get that from listening to these. I thought the bass was, though it had a lot of bass volume, was fairly restrained. And if you do look and decide to get nerdy and look at the graph for them, you will notice that where the bass meets the mids, there's almost like a divot where they took a bit of the volume out of that frequency. And it's almost like a fire break, where you are doing it as a cautionary measure to create that distinction. Now, once again, it's kind of like the over sharpening thing, where it's sort of like a trick you can do to create more resolution. And certainly, it's not like Audio-Technica doesn't know how to make headphones or anything. Like, you've got the R70X, which is a reference headphone and is able to create sounds that sound a lot more natural and be able to more organically create a lot of that detail and that separation, that resolution, while still keeping it natural. But these are a much more expensive pair of headphones. These ones are 300. I think now they're like 380. They were like 350 when I bought them, and I got them on sale. But then on top of that, you typically want like a good source for these, because these need a lot of power in order to really sound as good as they can be. So then that's like at least another $100 if you want a good one. So basically, I would not hold it against Audio-Technica for doing that, but it does have some negative consequences. In this case, I think the bass, for me anyway, is fairly enjoyable, so it's not so much a negative consequence for me. I guess you could say that it doesn't have the same thickness and the same body that something like a Fiio FT1 has. Because the Fiio FT1, the bass presentation is very thick and very rich. There is a lot of bass to be had here. It has a lot of mid bass, but then it also has a lot of sub bass. Now, mid bass is where you hear a lot of the sort of drum beats and a lot of the bass that you're more keenly aware of, whereas sub bass is more of a rumble thing. And I really like the mid bass on these. I think that this is a very thumpy bass, and it's a much more fun and engaging bass than even the M50X, which I already find very fun and engaging. I do like the M50X bass because it does almost feel a little more restrained and a little clearer, which is consistent with the image that they're trying to go for with the M50X. But certainly the FT1's bass is very fun and really enjoyable, and really the centerpiece of the headphones here. But then there is a but. This leads into a conversation about attack and decay. Now, this is a more technical term that people who are new to audio, or maybe have never even really dipped their toes into audio, might not be aware of. But basically, there's these two terms, attack and decay. One refers to what happens when a note appears, so like the leading edge of a note, and the other refers to how quickly or how slowly that note goes away, so it decays. So attack is when notes sort of like pop into focus, and then decay is how quickly they disappear. So for something like the M50X that is very articulate, it is because it has a strong attack. So the leading edge of notes, they pop in, and they do so fairly quickly. And that is in part due to the construction of these two headphones. These ones are plastic, and plastic is fairly revealing and unforgiving. Sound does tend to bounce off of it pretty easily, I guess you could say. Whereas the Fiio FT1, they are made of wood, and it tends to resonate and almost absorb the sound and take a little bit for it to bounce back. So it actually has a long decay, which can cause the notes to stick around, which gives it that sort of thick, rich lushness. But for me, it also has the additional problem of sort of covering up certain details. Like I mentioned, that mid-range, how that mid-range can sometimes disappear. I think is a combination of all these different things, where you have sort of an underemphasized treble, so you don't have that sharpness. You have a lot of bass emphasis, and then you have that decay, which keeps the bass around for longer. So while it does sound very harmonious and very smooth, sometimes it feels like detail can kind of disappear, and that to me was a bit distracting. Now, contrast that with the M50X, where it has that sharp, well, strong, I would say, leading edge to the note, which causes everything to feel fairly separated, fairly resolving. So if you think about the resolution on a TV, the downside of that, though, is it can feel a bit inorganic. Like I mentioned, it doesn't have that weight or that body. It does have some weight and body just due to the sheer bass volume of it. But it does, that sort of fire break that they put definitely subtracts from some of the body there. And so ultimately, that is really the difference between these two. I did not expect them to be as yin and yang as they are, but it is funny how things work out. I was originally just going to do a review on the M50X, and then I ended up getting these and listening to the two of them. And as my thoughts developed, this image of these two having opposite mandates and then opposite executions just kind of formed. And so here we are. And really, at the end of the day, for my personal taste, I think I actually like the M50X more, which kind of feels like a bit of a narrative violation. Because if you go into the more picky, more audiophile circles, you will find people loving the FT1s and then strongly disliking the M50X. The M50X has sort of been the punching bag of a lot of reviews, whereas the FT1 lately has been the new sort of mid-budget darling, I guess you could say. But ultimately, what I'm trying to get at here is that you can't really logic your way into liking something. A lot of advice online is, oh, just keep it for a little bit, listen to it for a few weeks, and then go back to your old headphones, and you will see the light. But the thing is if it didn't really vibe with you to begin with, it probably won't vibe with you going forward, like ultimately. Which is why genuinely I think that the best way to find out what you're gonna like is to try things. And obviously it's a little easier when stuff's cheaper. These ones are both around like 160. So I know it's not exactly inconsequential to spend that kind of money just to try something. Which is why typically, like, definitely try them and try to form an opinion on them fairly quickly, because then you can just return them. Hopefully you have pretty easy access. Like, I know Amazon has pretty generous returns. I work in a store. There's 30-day returns in the store. And then there's websites like headphones.com that have year-long returns. So you could spend like maybe 2-3 months if you want to really get an idea, and then still return them. And that's the thing. You do have to kiss a few frogs to find your Prince Charming. It took me a little while, but personally, I think that my favorite are these, these are $40. And honestly, I could probably just stop with these and be happy. So don't really feel like you need to upgrade if you find something that you like. Or if you do want to upgrade, try to have a better idea of what you might like. Because at the end of the day, it's all a matter of taste. Like, yes, the M50X is more articulate, but maybe some people will want that thickness and that richness of the Fiio FT1. And yes, the Fiio FT1 is very smooth and doesn't make too many mistakes, but maybe you're like me and you just can't really hear enough detail for your ears. Like, generally, these two are both fairly smooth and vibey, but a main difference is that these ones don't have nearly as much decay. So the resolution, you don't lose as much of it. It doesn't have as much detail and sharpness as the M50X, but that decay to my ears, I hate to say, it's kind of disqualifying for the FT1s, and I'm probably going to end up returning them. But anyway, moral of the story is you don't have to trust the supposed experts online who will tell you that you have to stick with a better headphone, or you have to upgrade, or, oh my god, these ones are life-changing. These are the new budget kings, guys. They're the new budget kings. Just try things, and if you like something, you can stick with it, or you can sort of try to continue down that route if you want something a little bit better. And so that's going to be it for this head-to-head comparison review. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, definitely hit the like button. And if you want to hear more, maybe you like this style, definitely subscribe. And with that, I will see you guys later.